Hi, it's Kevin May, the Editor-in-Chief of PhocusWire, here in the PhocusWire studio, joined by Troy Flanagan. Thank you, Troy, for joining us. You're the VP of Government Affairs and Industry Relations at the AH&LA.
Correct.
Thank you for joining us. Right, so the session that you're doing here at the Phocuswright Conference is titled Travel and the Future of Cities. From your perspective, because you obviously have a very particular view on where all this is kind of heading. I mean, what is your general kind of, we can go through a lot of different elements of this, but hospitality and where all this is kind of going based on sharing, connected cities and all those kind of things. Just give us your kind of broad umbrella view, first of all, please.
Sure, and thanks, Kevin, for having me here and for inviting us to be part of this conference. Okay. It's a great event. I think where we see it as the hotel industry, we've been part of cities for decades. I mean, every city has an inn or a B&B and has for probably centuries. And so I think when we see cities looking at how to adapt with some of these new technologies, some are not so new, some are just new ways to transact old types of business. We want to be part of that conversation. We've been part of the communities for, as I said, for decades. But as they think about how to update their ordinances or their regulations or their taxes, we've just made sure that we're part of that conversation because it has a lot of implications for not only our members but for the residents of those cities and our workers who live there.
Do you sense that you haven't been part of that conversation more in recent years as a result of the gig economy, the sharing economy, whatever title you want to give it?
No, I don't think so. I think we've whether it's the property level members or our local versions of AHLA, state and local hotel associations, or hospitality and travel associations, CVBs, they've been part of interacting, engaging with cities. That's what they do on a daily basis. I think it's probably the cities themselves who are catching up to what to make of some of these newer technologies and newer ways to transact travel business.
But as an organisation, you've been fairly vocal in various ways about the private accommodation and sharing accommodation. What has your stance hardened or softened in the last few years? I mean, it was very vocal a while ago.
Yeah, I think for the past several years we've made it very clear that we think that when you separate out what people generally call private accommodations or short-term rentals, there's some different terminology within that context, and we want to make sure that that's very clear. There's in our minds a big difference between home sharing, which was the genesis of companies like Airbnb, where you're truly sharing part of your home or your entire home for a limited amount of time, or an accessory dwelling like a garage apartment, versus what we're increasingly seeing, which is investors buying up multiple units of apartments or condos in one building, living in none of them and renting them 365 days a year. That's a hotel. And so we want to make sure that the discussions when cities are trying to determine how to how to adapt and allow this very popular new type of lodging to exist in their cities, that the part that really is not new, which is essentially running a hotel, that be treated more like our members are treated, the rules and regulations we adhere to, and then make room for true home sharing.
Okay. There are positive aspects, some would argue, to the emergence of private accommodation and perhaps those, property managed large condos. Would you agree that, or do you think it's much more about whether they're treated the same?
Yeah, I think every city and every state has to make those decisions for themselves as to what makes sense for in their mix of lodging, of residential, of commercial within the zoning context. And we have never advocated for any type of silver bullet solution from a national perspective. What works for a place like Myrtle Beach or Vail, Colorado is going to be different than downtown LA or San Francisco, with very distinct housing constraints. And so certainly, we've seen the innovation and a movement for travelers who want to have a little more flexibility and a different type of experience. You're seeing hoteliers offer that. But we just want to make sure that those are all done within the context of similar rules that are applied to our members, so that that everyone's treated fairly.
Do you have a genuine and an official or unofficial dialogue with the likes of Airbnb and people like that, or do you do it through regulatory bodies at all?
I think it's a mix of both. Within some of these contexts, quite frankly, there is some heated conversation that takes place more in the public realm. But we're open to welcoming any business into the travel space, whether they be in the form of a new OTA or a new brand. But again, just making sure that the different types of business that's transacted on these newer platforms is really captured through the prism of the way our members are held to, the regulations and taxes our members are held to. I think that's the important piece.
Yeah, and as you kind of alluded to, a lot of this debate has been kind of strung out in the press, unfortunately, or maybe it's great for us because we have things to write about.
Right.
But, same question, but I'm trying to get you to think how they're thinking. Do you think they have softened their stance towards their own adherence to regulations and things like that? Airbnb, for example, did a very significant agreement in Amsterdam, in Europe, where I'm from, and that was seen in some quarters as them kind of relaxing a little bit and offering an olive branch. Okay, we're here, we do need to start kind of listening to what it is all about really on the ground, rather than just doing our kind of blindly forging ahead element.
Yeah, I think that certainly it does appear in messaging and in practice that they are more willing, that specific company and brand, to work with the jurisdictions in which they operate. I can't speak to their motivations, but it is helpful when they're coming to the table and working on solutions. We may disagree on the final outcome, but the fact that they want to pay taxes is a good thing. We may think that it should be more compulsory than voluntary, but the fact that they recognize that, even in Brian Chesky's own words, that in some places it makes sense to only have one host, have one home rented, as opposed to multiple units. And so, we certainly appreciate that.
Okay, and lastly, Troy, one element of your session later is going to kind of allude to over-tourism and things like this. You represent hotels that are in cities that arguably are getting more congested. Certainly, the emphasis is often in Europe, so places like Venice and Barcelona and places like that. But just from a general perspective, as someone who knows a lot about the industry and has an interest in the industry, where is the kind of over-tourism debate going? And also, whose responsibility is it to kind of alleviate that or work within it? Is it local authorities, or does the industry have a responsibility?
Well, I think that it would primarily be the folks that live and work and govern that city. And so if they recognize there's an issue, there are levers in place to deal with that. And those are the types of things that have been applied to the traditional hotel industry, which are zoning regulations, being able to get permitted to open a new property. Any new hotel that opens in a place like Barcelona or Venice would have had to have gone through a process to have been approved. The same cannot be said for every short-term rental or vacation rental. And I think that's where there's some issues, and cities are trying to figure out how to catch up so they can at least have some say in whether there is over-tourism or not.
Right, I understand. I mean, I think perhaps what I'm getting at is also, do you think the hotel industry should perhaps, have a kind of a moral obligation to just think about, even though they may be allowed, because of zoning and things like that, to build another 300-room hotel in Barcelona, they should be thinking maybe this isn't a good idea, or hotels just not think like that, because if they have the opportunity, they'll go in because they can build something.
Yeah, I think hotels absolutely recognize the social responsibility of running their properties, but I think there are also a lot of positive benefits to a new hotel opening, whether it be job creation or the tax revenue base of that city. And so in the months, if not years, before a property opens and starts taking on travelers, there's a lot of conversations that go in between those city officials, weighing the benefits, how big of a property, how it's going to impact the residents that live around there, traffic, parking issues. All that is taken into context before a hotel ever opens its doors. And I think that's kind of a disparity with short-term rentals that don't in some way go through a bit of a vetting process, or some way for the local authorities to have a little bit of control of that.
Okay. Troy Flanagan, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here.